All right, good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, September 20th, 2022. It is 6 p.m., and we are gathered as the Athens-Clarke County Mayor and Commission. The mayor's hungry and the agenda is short, so that's what I'll say at the beginning of this night. We of course have, as we always do, several opportunities for public input, and those work similar for each of these areas. We will have an opportunity regarding the consent agenda, which are tonight, items 1 through 5, for old and new business, which are items 6 through 19, and an opportunity regarding the single rezoning request that we have. For public input, each opportunity is limited to 3 minutes total per individual. There is a light that you see in front of Clerk Spratlin here in the lovely lavender, and that light will turn green when you begin speaking, yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and red when that 3 minutes has expired. So, to begin our evening tonight, is there any commissioner who would like to remove an item from the consent agenda before we ask for comment on those items?
I'm sorry.
Yes, Commissioner Thornton.
There was one. I'm sorry. I should have been paying attention. Why you distract me?
That's not consent.
No, I'm good then.
All right. Anyone else? All right. So, members of the public, would anyone like to speak to any consent agenda item? Once again, those are items 1 through 5 on tonight's agenda. All right. We're going to move on to old and new business. Again, old and new business are items 6 through 19. Would anyone like to speak to any one of these items tonight? Crickets in City Hall this evening, my friends. All right, we're going to go ahead and dive right in. All right, once again, first item, old business, item 6, regards a held-over project from last month at 4555 Lexington Road. I know Commissioner Davenport, you've done a little bit of work on this to highlight some of those areas of commission-defined option activity. Would you like to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So working with the developer and some of the homeowners to come to some form of agreement, I'm proposing a commission-defined option, which is listed in our packet 1 through 6. There's just three additional things that I've added. A 50-foot wooded buffer to have dichotomy between the two neighborhoods. A second connection at Woodgrove Drive to handle, to ease some of the concerns about the traffic going up Woodgrove Drive to the cul-de-sac. And of course, I love my trees. The conserved canopy of 20% shall be maintained and capped at 87 homes. And make sure that the sidewalk is built on the Woodgrove side, on the western side of Woodgrove to Lexington Road from Woodhurst, and that the homes shall be, there won't be any attached home, and that was something that the neighbors in Woodgrove had concern about, because that more likely will increase the density and the traffic. So I believe this is a healthy compromise, and I hope that we can approve.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else like to speak to this item? Commissioner Thornton?
I just was wondering, with the CDO, and it looks like that the developer and the commissioner took in some of the concerns that was expressed. With this last CDO, has there been a conversation with you or the developers and the residents, Commissioner Davenport?
Yeah, there's been continuous conversation via email and telephone with the residents
Okay, thank you.
and the developer.
Thank you.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the CDO includes sidewalk fronting Lexington Highway to start to begin to fill that gap there.
So my understanding from, and I thank Pappas and Lisa Pappas and Brad Griffin, that when the development is going to be built, it's required to have the sidewalks on a standard.
Okay.
So the sidewalk will be on Lexington Highway, which will connect to the next door property, which connects all the way through town.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Houle?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and if I'm reading the conditions correctly, maybe Attorney Drake can clarify the way number 5 is written to say a sidewalk shall be provided along the west side of Woodgrove Drive and connecting to and along Highway 78 to Woodhurst. So that does cover that additional area they wouldn't be required to build, right? Is that? My first read of this,
If you note your concern, I can make sure it's addressed, because Lisa worked on this language with Patrick, I believe. So what is your concern, and I'll work to make sure it does what you want it to.
well, I was just speaking to my colleague's question, Commissioner Link's question, I think her question is, my reading of number 5 was that addressed her concern, but I just wanted to make sure that the attorneys agreed. And then we've got the current and
5 would
future
ensure
owners on the hook.
that there was kind of frontage sidewalk on Highway 78. And I think, in accord with Commissioner Davenport's observation, code would require that as a matter of course.
Question.
Commissioner Myers?
Since we're getting a lot of good sidewalk questions here, there's one question that I've been having, and that is the sidewalk on the area that goes, the area that's in the CDO, going along, what is it, Woodgrove? In the part that, the road that cuts over to the new road, is there automatically sidewalk on that little section?
Yes, it's automatic
Okay.
sidewalks that will go into the neighborhood.
Yeah, and I will add that I did a little looking around here too on other developments that are on the east side or different places in town that have this same zoning, which would be the RS8. And they included Wakefield, Greystone on the east side, Towns Walk, Princeton Mill, the village off of Mitchell Bridge. And those, it would be a similar type of zoning in there, so.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, I guess my question is, and this would probably be on your list, Attorney Judd, is that making sure that this developer can do a sidewalk in a neighborhood that's not the property he's developing, as far as how the right-of-way is conveyed, or how that's, how somebody can jump into another neighborhood to do something. And it seems to me with all of this, I'm wondering why the topic doesn't go back to planning and the planning department with 6 different conditions on it.
So I was able to find, pulled up the item, and so the concern with respect number 5, a sidewalk should be provided along the west side of Woodgrove Drive connecting to and along Highway 78 Lexington Road to Woodhurst Drive, is that sidewalk is going to go through another neighborhood that this developer doesn't own.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah, I would have to look, that seems to me that might be problematic too, but I will check on that.
Yeah, and I guess with all that, the depth of these 6 conditions of zoning, it seems to me that it might be better if this goes back to the planning department that we have and the planning commission to vet that.
Commissioner Davenport?
So, in the original, application, 3 of the conditions were approved by the planning commission. I just added 3 more, and one of the sidewalk. But according to, from what I understand, Woodgrove is a public street, it's owned by the city. And one of the conditions from listening to the resident was that they would like a sidewalk. So the developer said, okay, I will add a condition of building a sidewalk from Woodgrove to Woodhurst, just to accommodate the residents in the East Hampton.
I mean, I think that's the issue is there enough, making sure there's enough right-of-way. Planning may have already done all this. Lisa may have worked with Brad, enough right-of-way to build that. I guess if they agree to build it.
And I see a member of planning staff nodding, yes, there is.
So that,
And so-
you want
yeah.
to speak to this?
Yeah, that would help vet
Yeah.
properly. Oh, she's like,
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Yes. What we're going to do for our next fun trick here in the three-ring circus that is City Hall, just have some random residents answer some questions about planning and zoning code.
The role of the citizen planner.
We
It's okay.
we love our resident experts. Yes.
I think the clarification was helpful. As long as the sidewalk installation is within public right-of-way that's been dedicated to Athens-Clarke County, we're in good shape, and we're not doing something to somebody else's property. we would always get the appropriate width for those facilities at the time of design and dedication. So we've got enough space, and it's my understanding that this is a couple of additional statements beyond what Planning Commission considered. So it's not inconsistent with the line of thought with their recommendation.
Okay. And then maybe we can highlight that for the agenda item, which ones, Commissioner Davenport, are the ones that initially came from that vetting, as well as your additional ones, and clarify that. That'd be great.
Commissioner Link, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the sidewalk in the right-of-way, saying that typically there is right-of-way attached to this public road that would accommodate a sidewalk. So I think that Bruce clarified that for us. Thank you, Bruce.
All right, thanks, everyone. All right, item 7, of course, we discussed at length at our last voting meeting, and of course, this is the prospective modification in a quorum requirement. Given that this body punted the question to our next voting meeting, it of course is on the agenda as a result of that commission decision. However, I'll just remind everyone that if this is kind of voted unfavorably at that next meeting, it will not appear again, and that will be the end of it. And it will go into the closet with many other ideas that were floated and then not consummated, which would be okay. All right, we are going to move on to new business. Item 8 is the Animal Control Ordinance review. I want to thank the Government Operations Committee. There are a lot of details in our Animal Control Ordinance, of course, because we consider all kinds of component parts, and so there was a lot of work that we saw here. And so I'm going to turn it over to Government Operations Chair, Commissioner Denson, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, just for a moment, please. I know you made your comment about the quorum requirement, it may go away. So,
Or consummated.
or whatever. So we are not having no comment at all. I just don't want to miss this opportunity. If you want me to wait till next month, I'll be glad and I'll repeat it, but.
If you'd like to, yeah, if you'd like to speak to it now, by all means.
Okay, thank you. I am a bit confused on how this conversation even became a conversation. I do not know of any voting meeting that a meeting had to be canceled since I've been on the commission because a quorum was not present. I did check in with Clerk Spratlin. There has not been a meeting that has been canceled because a quorum has not been present. I think we got all off target at the last meeting, and we confused a lot of people because we started talking about committee meetings, executive meetings, but that has nothing to do with the quorum. I also wanted to say that changing the quorum in the charter, it is just risky business. We will start decaying the charter and democracy without real public input into such a change. Because if we change the charter for this, when we feel like we need to change something else, we will have opened that door to just start nitpicking the charter apart. I do think the charter needs to be revisited, even revised, but I don't think it needs to be done piecemealing. Personally, I have never missed a meeting that I have not let the mayor pro tem or the mayor know. Now I understand I need to let Jean know also. So if there's a meeting that requires a vote, I have never missed a meeting because I did not let somebody know. So I think if it's a matter of the meetings that we want to change the charter, and there are people who are not making these meetings, I think the first thing we should do is either the mayor pro tem, check with that person and find out why they're meeting meetings. Nobody's ever asked me about missing a meeting. I thought I was doing the right thing, but apparently it wasn't enough. The other thing I want to clear up for folk that may be listening, executive session, if you go into executive session and it's just you, and you just want to talk to you by yourself, you can do that, because no voting happens in executive session. I see Commissioner Denson shaking his head, but I don't think that jumping to changing the charter, and there was another one, my other example, I made it real clear I was not going to attend any more meetings that involved a particular, and I'm not going to mention no names, an employee. That was clear from, and that was executive conversations. The other thing is, on committees, I always let the chair or the mayor or mayor pro tem know. So if people are not letting people know that they can't come to a meeting, it's not the quorums that's the problem. The problem is communication. So I know that this charter was not one of the easiest things. How many times we tried to get this charter through? 2 or 3 times. I don't think anybody around here, we might just take it for granted now, but a lot went into passing this charter of unification. And I don't think that we should, as a body, speak for a whole bunch of other folk without any input. And it does look suspect to me as the calls that I got, because I don't think nobody's missed meetings that were voting meetings that had to be canceled because there was not a quorum. Now, if I'm not correct on that, I would like for somebody to correct me, but I just don't remember in my tenure having to cancel a meeting because we did not have a quorum.
Well, Commissioner, just to kind of speak very briefly to a couple of your points, we, of course, have a charter review process that happens on an every decade arrangement, and we've been through one recently, and then there will be another kind of at the end of the decade. So there is always a formal opportunity for review of the entirety of the charter. We, of course, occasionally zero in on small pieces of the charter that we recognize may need some review. We all might remember just a couple of years ago when we were attempting to deliver some of the CARES Act dollars to the public. One of the things we wanted to make crystal clear in the charter is that we could provide for indigent services with funds. And so that was a charter modification that we wanted to make for the public benefit. In this case, it was my decision to ask this body to consider the question, because we had many executive sessions where either we were unable to initiate the beginning of that executive session or unable to conduct that session at all. And it is a requirement that we have a quorum for any executive session, which, as you note, is a non-voting meeting, but does require 7 members currently in order to just begin the meeting. And because we often have items that come up unplanned, and it's simply the nature of a large organization like this in a local government, whether it's a real estate or a personnel question or a safety question, one of the prospects was to say, given people's fast-moving lives and sometimes the fast-moving nature of local government, is it reasonable to say we could have an executive session with 6 members? Again, where there'd be no final decision, but where at least staff could give us some of their expertise and we could hear the content of the question. And once again, if it's the will of this body to retain the quorum requirements that are embedded in the current charter, I'm okay with that. But I frequently consult with the clerk and with the attorney, and sometimes we come up with a prospect for a solution. May not be the solution desired by the group, and that's okay. We've got a lot of opportunities.
I'm glad you clarified that, because that was one of the questions that I was getting. So I'm glad for that clarification. And again, I do think, though, from where I sit, if this was a serious issue, and apparently it is, if you're saying that there were executive sessions that could not function, and if it's the same folk that are missing those executive sessions, there needs to be a conversation before changing the charter, in my opinion. The other thing is, I will go on record, again, there is one particular situation I said I was not coming back to, and I didn't come back to. And I do know right around my reelection, it was circulated that I was missing meetings, but they didn't tell the whole story. So I'll wait till, I'm good. I'm glad you clarified that, because the calls that I was getting, I could not answer. And if there's a problem with me, I would rather for somebody to come to me and say, what's going on? Maybe the executive sessions should be 8 o'clock in the morning. Some of us got jobs. Maybe we need to leave and go, it's easy for some people to say, well, we can be here all night. But maybe it needs to be in the morning. But we never talked about this as a collective body on that it should be changed, how should it be changed, and I just feel like I'm in that position again, that I'm being pushed into something that I can't even explain. But I've gotten it out, I know it's recorded, I'm good.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I'm wondering if the attorney has looked into the question of whether it would be permissible to change quorum just for executive session, to maintain the 7 quorum for actual voting and agenda meetings, but allow a lower quorum for executive session, because that's where the real problem lies. And we are not voting in executive session, and they are not public meetings. So it kind of seems logical that there could be a different application for it if the state law would allow.
I have not looked at that issue. I feel fairly certain that state law is not going to speak to that issue at all. I think, I will say, I think that creating that inconsistency, without giving it some more thought, I'm not sure that would be the best thing to do. I mean, you have to vote to go into executive session, and so that is the issue, to vote to go, you have to have a quorum of a meeting to vote, what I'm saying, to go into executive session. And then, Georgia law, I know it's not the practice of this body, but Georgia law does say that you can vote in executive session on the matters like related to purchase of real estate and to authorize settlement of certain litigation. However, you have to re-vote on it in public for it to be effective. There are a few exceptions, but it may not be in the practice of this body. I just wanted to clarify that. We operate by consensus a lot of times. But that being said, I would be hesitant to try and do that. I think that would create confusion, especially when you got to have that number to vote to go in,
And so then the clarification for me then, we are primarily talking about executive session, primarily.
That's been the opportunity that we've not been able to initiate.
And it's not the general meetings that people are like, who's missing all the regular meetings? I just needed that clarity to move forward. Thank you.
All right. Moving back to animal control, Commissioner Denson.
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, this was definitely was a lot of work. We kind of went almost entirely through the animal services ordinance from basically top to bottom, and thankful to the work, especially of Animal Services Director Crystal Barber, Lisa Mallow with Athens Pets, and Attorney Sherry Hines for really doing a lot of this work for us. The main highlights here is, for one, this kind of changes up the way the trap, neuter, and return process works, and I think makes it actually easier for residents to actually engage and take advantage of. So we'll hopefully see higher participation in that program. And also added elements to protect quality of life, especially around dog and cats and how they're being sold and where and how they can be sold. So put some regulations with that. And also strengthens laws concerning animal abuse and neglect, and kind of works in tandem with some of the newer state laws that kind of bring us into line too with that. And also just tons of a lot of just like cleanup of language, bringing some of our language and terminology and definitions more consistent and more clearly written so people can understand it better. And there was one kind of large element that we left off, and that was part of this, a licensing for cats and dogs, required licensing. And we saw that as a definitely a big issue for us to have to dive into. So we kind of decided to go ahead and leave that part and have that part stay with committee, where the committee can work in future to come back and bring recommendations. That part has been left off here. And yeah, I'm definitely pretty proud of all the work that was done, and thank you to Assistant Manager Edwards for helping lead that. And I think I think it's a really good improvement.
Thanks, Commissioner. Any other input on this item? Does everybody feel comfortable moving this to consent? I enjoy the nods. We're going to move number 8 to consent, Gene. Thank you very much. All right, number 9 regards the Fowler Mill Road Bridge over Little Bear Creek, and this is a design contract. I know this is of great interest to folks who live on the far west side of town. As people know, this bridge has been out for some period of time. And so fortunately, we've been able to work with both state, and the state has been able to work with our federal partners so that ultimately this bridge will be completely replaced. But in the near term, it will be made functional again for passage. My understanding is that it'll be this coming spring when it's safe for temporary passage, and then it'll be a couple of years down the road when it'll be permanently replaced. So that's sort of the long and the short of it. Manager Williams, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, sir. I think you covered most of it. What we were really hanging in there for was some state and federal assistance to replace the bridge like it should be. And we've sort of followed GDOT's lead on that allowed us to get to a point to where we feel like we do have a commitment from GDOT, and part of what you're being asked to do is approve the mayor, as Commissioner Hamby would say, consummating that agreement with GDOT. And
Did he just say it again? Did he say Mayor Hamby too?
I see Commissioner Hamby. But I say that we know that this has been a huge inconvenience, and we see other examples around the country where infrastructure, you've got to keep it up. You got to pay attention to it, and so I think the most notable thing, Mayor, is to share is that we move forward with this. We get our application in there. You approve some design work that can start, and then there can be some fixes that might get it open. I want to say, though, reduce loads. It can't go back to the functionality it had before because it's compromised. So in this case, there will be some reduced loads. We can maybe get some traffic across it as a bridge to get us to replacing it in the future.
So in layperson terms, personal vehicles, but probably not heavy truck traffic.
Yes.
Commissioner Houle?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I know a lot of people in and around the Bogart and West Athens area will be pleased to see this moving forward, although there's been a lot of consternation about how long it's been closed. And the weight limit issues with the bridge there's been issues of truck traffic that wasn't supposed to be going down there already going down there. So a couple quick questions for you, Manager Williams, and then I'd be happy with this moving to consent and moving along as quickly as we can. The first is, staff has been very helpful throughout this process in communicating with me. My understanding is that some additional signage may be provided, including further up the road, to try to more effectively discourage that truck traffic, both in the short term and long term. Is that part of the plan moving forward?
Yes, I think that in fairness to traffic and I've not had this conversation with staff, but it would seem logical to me to put posted reductions in the weight allowed on the bridge, up the road so that folks have time to make a different plan.
Mm-hmm. And what, if any, further commission action will be needed after this to move forward on that interim repair, so to speak, so that it can be opened up in the short term for vehicle traffic before the full replacement comes years down the road?
Give me 1 second, Commissioner.
Okay.
It could be, it depends on the cost. It could be a memo. It could be that we have to, depending on the budget source for the repair, which we're estimating $50,000 to $100,000, we don't know. It could be that we come back to you for you to approve the award of that contract or change order if we do it with an existing contractor. But we anticipate all that happening around probably January 23.
Okay, so folks can expect that roughly around January 2023, that bridge should be getting worked on or be reopened?
Getting worked on.
Getting worked
And if we
on.
can beat that, that's even better.
Okay, and so when can we expect it to be reopened by? Like how
I
long
would
should that
say,
work take?
you know, it depends on the extent of the work, but late January, early February, hopefully.
Okay, and that matches the 3 to 6 month timeline that I had been given by staff a little while ago. So, yeah, I guess the last thought on this is just, if a future action is required on this commission to provide a change order, something that can't be accomplished through a NOPA, I'd hope that we'd be able to act on that as expeditiously as possible, especially if it's going to come around the holiday times, if we can try to get that either on a special session in December if need be, or the moment we get back. I would just hate to further hold up something that's taken so long because of our own calendar, so.
Well, there's a lot of work that we try and treat equally, but we understand that there's been a big lag here, a huge inconvenience for folks, so this is a priority for us.
And I'm sure it's not lost on my colleagues that we've been able to respond to some other, albeit busier, larger streets that have closed, quite quickly, and this one's dragged on for a while, so. But with that said, I'd be happy to move this to consent. So.
Everybody fine with this on consent?
Yes.
All right, Gene, we are winning tonight. 9 is also on consent. All right, item 10 regards our live stream pipe replacement priorities, and we saw this recently in a work session. We, of course, have constant need, as Manager Williams just noted, to make sure our infrastructure is sufficient for public benefit, and this is a piece of that. Any input from commissioners on this? Or would commissioners like to move this also to consent?
Consent.
All right, 10 to consent as well. All right. Item 11 is really kind of one of the series of dominoes. Did you want to speak to the
If you don't mind.
live stream pipe?
and I won't-
Go right ahead, Manager Williams.
Less than a minute. So this is pretty significant in that this is infrastructure that many people don't think about, but it conveys water across our county, and where, we have a lot of topography in Athens-Clarke County, a lot of creeks and streams, and they have to get under areas so that we don't have road closures, or in worst case, neighborhoods that are just shut off from access, which, we've dealt with those. And so the most recent version of this, y'all know we've had about 30 projects or so. We spent several $1 million in the last few years. Y'all have planned ahead and programmed some funds, which is necessary for us to keep on top of our infrastructure and not create crises where people can't get to where they need to get to. And in this case, I want to give y'all credit for budgeting funds so that we have them. Number two, highlight the work of the Stormwater Citizens Advisory Committee as they work to figure out how we pay for future capital projects, and that'll be coming to y'all on how we bake that into rate structures. And the third thing is that how staff is treating this. So, we have been going and replacing stormwater pipe that is corrugated metal pipe that had a very finite life, 25, 30 years perhaps, with concrete pipe, which has a 100-year life. So we are leaving Athens better than we found it. All right. However, the need is so great, and in the agenda item, since it's going on consent, there's probably about $25, $30 million worth of liabilities in the form of 45 segments that we have rated as needing to be addressed. This approach that you're being asked is lining the interior of pipes with a cost-effective solution that increases the life of them so that we can pay attention to our more critical pipes. And so this will save about $6 million of liability by spending $2, and I think that that's a great opportunity as we look and pay attention to life cycle. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks for those details, Manager Williams. I appreciate that. Such important stuff, as anybody who's had to get to work on Athena Drive or travel into town on Barber Street will know.
Thank you.
All right, item 11, again, is sort of one of these series of dominoes of housing work, much like we've been working on for the last couple of years in so many other contexts. And so we have a report that we requested from Opticos, and several of us were on a presentation that they provided for us about this missing middle scan. really to increase housing availability within existing neighborhoods. And so this is just a request for acceptance of that report, which is our typical process for bringing in a report. And of course, this will be part of that comprehensive planning process that we're in as we prepare that update for our comprehensive plan over the next year, 18 months or so. So Commissioner Link.
Yeah, I think we should leave this off consent because I think it's something that's really important and we should have the opportunity to present it to the public over and over again. And I want to encourage everybody on this body to present it to the public and send it to constituents when they do have concerns about housing availability, housing affordability, when they do come up in arms, when there is a denser housing project coming to their neighborhood. This clearly addresses the need and the future need. We are definitely facing a housing crisis as we speak, and it's only going to get worse if we don't begin to adopt measures like increasing density in single-family neighborhoods. And this report really clearly illustrates how that can be done as gently as possible. And these are methods that already exist in many of our older neighborhoods before contemporary zoning was a thing. You have neighborhoods like Boulevard and Cobham and Five Points that do have duplexes and accessory dwelling units and basement apartments and small apartment buildings packed right into these single-family neighborhoods. And they fit just fine. And it's something that we're going to have to return to in order to be a sustainable community. So I really encourage everybody out there to read this. I know it's kind of long. It's about 67 pages. But it is easy to scan and or to skim, and it's lots of pictures. And the pictures really say a lot. And I really, really want to encourage everyone to share it as much as possible and to use it as a tool to educate your constituents.
And Commissioner Denson, I should have recognized, thank you for having served on the Inclusionary Zoning Task Force. That, of course, was really one of the triggers that prompted this.
Yeah, definitely. It was, and just want to kind of clarify even, I think that the phrase missing middle gets confused a lot of times. And so just to say, it's like, a lot of times people think it's like, oh, it's like a middle class or something like that. But it's really what's talking about is like the size of the buildings. It's that we have a lot of, housing that is single-family houses, small houses. And then we have a lot of large apartment complexes downtown, these large, kind of multi-story large apartment complexes. We don't have a lot of what's in the middle, though. That's missing. And that's kind of stuff that apartment complexes that are smaller, maybe two-story, cottage courts, townhomes, triplexes, quadplexes, those kind of things that used to be built quite a bit of time back, 60, 70 years ago, post-war, and has kind of have stopped and fallen out of fashion. And so now we just don't really have that missing kind of, which is a good fit for a lot of these, as Commissioner Link was saying, more like residential neighborhoods. And also the buildings are supposed to be like house scale, so they mix very well into single-family house areas. But they have multiple units, and another defining part is that it's always in walkable, connected areas. So always going to be in along corridors that already have sidewalks, bike lanes, public transit access. Those kind of things are the corridors that we want to look at, not far-stretching areas. We want to find places that we're creating that connectivity to points of interest that people want to get to, whether it be parks, churches, commercial areas, stuff like that. And so, yeah, I along with the report is very dense. I think most people probably aren't going to read it, although if you really like housing and urban planning, please jump in there. But that presentation that the mayor spoke to, I think, is a nice, easy way. I think it was about an hour long. You can kind of speed way through it if you need to, skip through it. But it kind of points out some of the corridors that were recognized in Athens-Clarke County that are good places for missing middle kind of housing. And it also gives you very good examples of what missing middle is. So I definitely encourage everybody to kind of become more aware of that and have a better understanding of it. And then I'm very happy for this to be accepted and for this study to inform that planning and zoning work that's going to happen in the next few months.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Thornton.
I don't have any strong feelings one way or the other about this. My only concern is when we're presented things like this new concept of the missing middle, as Commissioner Denson shared with us, as a commissioner, I would have liked to know what other programs, projects, concepts that the committee looked at. I've said it on more than one meeting, there are national groups that deal with affordable housing. We do not tap into them for resources or advices. It looks like somebody wakes up one day and says, let's try this. And so I don't have no strong feeling about this, but I do think that we should be a little bit more diligent in looking at more than one idea, so we'll have something, so we can make some good choices. And until we admit that we don't know it all, and that everybody who comes to us, they're going to push their agenda, and we don't look out and see what else is out there, we do this community a huge disservice. So that's my point. Like I said, no, you're right, I'm not going to read all that. But I am going to say that we just need we need more opportunities to see what else is out there. And we have not done that. So that's my comment.
I think, Commissioner, you make a good observation in that any housing expert will note that there really is a whole menu of opportunities that we need to be looking at. One of those that many communities engage with is this one, but it's also the case that both in our future land use planning, which is going to be happening over the next year and a half, and with the contract that we have for affordable housing with our ARPA dollars, we're going to be seeing that buffet broaden. We're going to be seeing quite a bit of opportunity, including this opportunity. So I'm really excited about all of it.
Thank
Commissioner
you.
Myers?
Yeah, actually, I think one of the things that Commissioner Denson just said that finally clicked for me here, side comments here, was the missing middle in terms of types of housing rather than having anything to do with the sociology, economics, or so forth. And maybe if I look at page 15 of this report, it emphasizes to me that what we have is we have zoning that allows detached single-family units, and there's a whole continuum of housing there, and we have zoning for multifamily that addresses the mid-rise at the far end on the right, but there's duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, courtyards, apartments, bungalows, townhouses, multiplexes, live-work spaces that are not ones that we normally see in the way we're zoning right now. And I would ask Manager Williams to ask Planning Department for me if this middle missing housing is also an example of form-based zoning that I keep hearing reference to. The answer is yes? Yeah, on that. So that was good. I also wanted to ask, in the end of this report on next steps, it basically says, hey, we, this company that put this together for us, are saying, hey, we can do more work, or if you don't give us more work, we recommend the following. And so some of those were applying the findings of the scan to the zoning in the walkable areas, and doing some other things. And I was wondering how that fits in, if some of that could be done in conjunction with our future land use planning and comprehensive plan, or how it fits in with the work schedule that the planning department presented to us last week.
Thank you, Commissioner. Those are great questions. And I think what I heard planning staff say at the last meeting was that not to get too far ahead of the comprehensive planning process and the future land use maps, to make sure that, any new policies that have far-reaching implications that are done in concert with that planning, and people understand where those, it's all interrelated. So
Right.
I would offer that. I'd also share with you that that this is a way, that the missing middle approach is certainly a way to address creating more density, creating different capacity for affordable housing and additional housing, you know, in communities. But what we've seen as we watch other communities is that the policies are enacted, and then there's a latent understanding by residents about what that means from an impact standpoint, and it can become controversial because it's different from what people are accustomed to. And so I just say that to say that it is certainly a tool in the toolbox. It's worthy of consideration if done well with our comp plan, and if it's done well with transparent processes where folks are involved, like is our tradition. It will have an easier implementation here than what is probably happening in some other communities.
Anyone else for Commissioner
I
Denson?
had something real quick.
Yeah, Commissioner.
Manager Williams, if you could explain to me, I mean, we have duplexes and triplexes in this community. Were they just grandfathered in before we have zoning policies enacted that now prohibit them?
Possibly. The last major update of our zoning code was done about 20 years ago, you know, in the 2000s, and certainly some of those predate that. And as you know, with our zoning code, which is not intuitive to the average person, you know, there are different existing densities for residential development that allow, you know, duplexes and quadruplexes and things of that nature to occur in certain areas of the community. But if you open up a traditional, you know, a low-density residential neighborhood to, you know, so you've got larger lots, single-family homes, and then you put a quadplex right in there, understandably, it's different from what folks are accustomed to for people who bought into that neighborhood, and so there's going to be a reaction to that, and how we go about doing that's going to be the art.
Right.
And let me say this too, that example is not summarizing what the missing middle is.
Yeah.
But that's just one form it could take, you know, and how we do that, it's important for the future.
I guess I'm just not aware of any duplexes or triplexes even being built anytime lately.
Just as a case study, you know, we certainly have, and Assistant Planning Director Bruce Lonnie is here, but we've got zoning classifications like RM1, for example, where you would see construction of duplexes today. And certainly 15 and 20 years ago, lots of neighborhoods, say on Commerce Highway, you know, were built under that zoning classification that we have right now.
Well, like like for example, Millage Circle, there's just a duplex. It's just kind of there, you know, and it's.
And so in those.
I mean, how to get there, and why are we not allowed to allow any more anywhere else?
No, and you also mentioned that sort of grandfathering or sort of continuity of existing use. And so my street's a good example. It's zoned RS8, so single-family residences that if a new neighborhood was built, had to have 8,000 square feet, and you can just have a single-family house. The home next to me is a home built around the same time as mine, 1906, 1910. It's a quad. The house next to that is a triplex. The house on the other side of that is another single-family home with a single residence. And so you do have kind of these vestiges of, I think somebody mentioned earlier, pre-war housing patterns.
Yes.
And I think there is some recognition that there is some health in some neighborhoods for returning to some of that sort of pre-war dynamic.
Thanks.
Commissioner Hamby.
Sure. Another example is over off South Millage Avenue, going towards the golf course. A whole new development that was built just last year. Is full of duplexes.
Commissioner Thornton.
And I know the missing middle has its plan, or whatever you want to call it. But some of this also is based on our ordinances and our rules and things like that. I kind of dropped the ball with my work with Manager Williams about some property on Howard Circle I dropped the ball, you didn't this time. I dropped it. And we heard it at one of our budgeting meetings, where people own land and they cannot put up a manufactured home. So I don't think, and I surely do not want nobody to think I am promoting this missing middle as the cure-all, or one of the cure-alls, one of them. I know we got a toolbox. But there are things we could do right now to help with housing. And I don't, I don't know what comes first, the chicken or the egg. I mean, I think I would have appreciated this much more if we could have done some things like immediately, looking at ordinances that prevent people from putting up a manufactured home. Everybody has this nightmare about, like, the Rockford file trailer that Rockford lived in. Those homes don't look like that no more. But we're not even talking about the things we can do right now. And now we got a whole new concept that you want people to buy into, or we want people to buy into. So I'm gonna go along and, try to figure all this out. But there's some things we could do like yesterday. But we're all into this conceptual thing instead of what is tangible, and some of it is looking at our ordinances, making them compatible with the folk that are looking for homes that have land and cannot even build on them.
And I would anticipate that, given our comprehensive planning process and future land use innovations, we're probably going to see lots of those code sections over the next 18 months or 2 years. Remember, at its core, this is just the ceremonial process of accepting this report. So that's where we're at with this.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I'm going to go along with the report. But when y'all start filling in the gaps, I might have something to say.
Commissioner Denson.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to clarify, I mean, the idea, I think, behind us accepting this and moving forward with the action component of this, if this is accepted, is going to revisit our ordinances, our planning ordinances, so that we are actually encouraging and allowing in certain areas that have that connectivity, different kinds of housing like this that makes it easier for people. Actually removing, the whole point is to remove some of those hurdles so that we can actually have denser, more affordable housing and make it cheaper for that housing to be created so it can be sold or rented cheaper. So that is definitely the whole point of this here. And I do want to make sure that everybody watching at home or the media understands that we're definitely not just jumping into this. This was, the missing middle was part of the GIC report for our GIC team that this commission voted on accepting back in February 2019. The missing middle process was part of the inclusionary development charge that this commission voted on and accepted back in January 2020. And then, as the mayor spoke to, in the inclusionary housing task force that is made up of commissioners, planning department members, and also housing providers here in Athens-Clarke County, that this is something that we've been working on discussing for, I guess at this point, almost 2 years that we've been getting into, and all those meetings are available for people to watch online to kind of inform themselves. And I will say, going back to my comment that knowing that most people aren't going to read that, I mean that of members of the public, I do think that every member of the commission should read this report so that we are knowledgeable when discussing these things and making decisions basing on how we're going to do our planning and zoning and such.
Commissioner Denson, it was a joke. I will read the report, but again, when you listed all those dates of meetings, the root of what I was trying to say is I would have felt much better about this if you could have said, in 2020, we looked at the national That's what I'm saying. I'm not knocking this report. I'm saying the GIC committee has been together long enough that we would have different, maybe a smaller smorgasbord of projects. I just would have felt better knowing that there were 3 or 4 other things that if it took this long to get to this, I question that also. But that's my point. Yes, I'll read the report though.
I just want to clarify, that we did look at much other things. I went to trainings here that the state put on different types of housing, missing middle, where we had experts from all over the country come and speak. We had one at the Classic Center where they came and spoke about missing middle. This is something that is widely accepted by housing advocacy groups. I would be shocked to hear of one that does not support this. And so I just want to make it clear that the work that we're doing here, this has come to, has been extremely well researched, has definitely been compared to other peers, other organizations, and has been, this was not something that we just jumped at or some kind of new thing. This has been very well researched and very well worked on.
All right, we need to move on, but before we do, get a comment from Commissioner Hool. No, all right. All right, we are going to move on to item 12. Great piece of what we do routinely here, natural area preservation. And so there is a conservation easement that is being contemplated for a large segment of the Rock and Shoals area off Barnett Shoals Road. If commissioners have not visited the site, it's beautiful. I encourage you to get together with staff, take a look at this. And so this is moving this partnership with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources forward with the assistance of a grant from the Georgia Outdoor Stewardship Program.
Yes, sir.
Is everything?
Consent.
Consent-o-matic for the people?
Yep.
Consent.
All right. 12 is consent, Gene. All right, 13 is by title only. It's a request of the Sheriff's Department regarding the vehicle fleet. Item,
I can offer some insight.
Please.
Unless you were about to say.
no, go right ahead.
And we're working with the sheriff's office but a first blush at that, what you're being asked to do are several things. One is they are taking receipt of 2 new vehicles as is part of our fleet replacement. And the 2 vehicles that the new ones are replacing, they would like to hold on to because there's just this delay in the supply chain, provision of vehicles. And that, so there's the commission, as you know, only the commission can add new vehicles to the fleet. So that's part of the request. And then of course, there's the sheriff and then there's our staff. And our staff would say, well, make sure that we put them on the replacement budget, so that whenever they break down and need to be replaced, we don't have to come out of pocket for the whole thing. The second request that staff's still scrutinizing pretty closely is for the sheriff to buy a truck that is not on our fleet replacement recommendations at this point. So sheriff's asking for some special consideration to acquire the truck, and it's proposed in the agenda item that he would use some drug forfeiture funds to buy the truck, so it's not as if it's coming from the fleet replacement. But one of the things we'd look for is some continuity of process where, other departments are afforded the same opportunity, so we don't want to get out of cycle there. So we're still looking at that, but that's basically what the agenda item's about.
Thank you, Manager Williams. Appreciate that. Any questions about that? And obviously, we don't have an agenda report in front of us. Commissioner Denson?
I guess just Manager Williams, when do you plan on having those detail, I guess, because if we're expected to vote on this in 2 weeks, we won't be able to have any kind of presentation, so just be like, when we're going to have ample details for us to make those decisions.
I think later this week, we're finalizing the comments and how the sheriff has submitted this for your consideration, and it could be that staff is in somewhat agreement but not, and we're going to parse out our comments so it's easy for you to understand the points from both sides.
Commissioner Hool?
Thanks, and I'm assuming this will be part of the report, but can you just make sure to elaborate on the ongoing budgetary impacts, not just the initial budgetary impacts, so we can understand that?
Absolutely. That is part of the budget summary where we break out, what the incremental indirects are to keep on the maintenance and the replacement schedule.
All right, item 14 regards the solar procurement agreement, construction service element for the Classic Center Arena. You might remember that bid went out for solar services and was affirmatively agreed to with the Cherry Street Group, and so this is moving that forward. Any questions or input on this?
No, I'm very supportive of Sorry, you look this
No, go
way.
ahead.
Okay, I'm very supportive of this, and I'd like to leave it on the agenda so I could speak to it. I also would ask you, I'm going back on the agenda, but I'd like to leave that number 10, the live stream pipe replacement, on the agenda, take it off the consent agenda and put it on the regular agenda,
Okay.
just so I can, and speak to it and review it a little bit more carefully, because it's, the highlight before made it sink in at what a big investment we're making there, so.
Will do.
And that particular agenda item is a TBD on the amount, so it would need to stay off the consent as well.
On the
Thank you,
on the
Commissioner Myers.
14, on the,
Yes.
so on the.
That's right.
Classic Center, okay.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to express support and point out that it is to be determined, so we need to leave it off consent. And I am looking forward to seeing that arena covered in solar panels, so we can get a little bit closer to our 100% renewable goals.
Thank you. All right, if we move on to 15, this really is contemplating commission confirmation of that planning department work plan and the comprehensive plan process that we saw in the Gantt chart at our recent work session, and this is sort of recurrent sort of activity of this body is to say, yes, planning department, these are the things we want you to do in approximately this order. Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, I want to thank staff for the presentation that we had and the details and highlighting some changes that we need to be studying to do before we can start implementing some of the other changes that have been studied and that you're highlighting from. So 11 and 15 go hand in hand, but yet the order and the sequencing of it, and I think that a real good point was that the census data was not with us on the comprehensive plan. It was being tallied, but yet now we have those details at this halfway point, which gives other details for the planning department to work with and auxiliary staff for that. But I am looking forward to some of the barriers that are in the missing middle scan document being addressed, and I think a lot of that is part of what this is going to do. So can we vote on this tonight so they can go ahead and get started working on it?
I would love it. I would love it. You know, if we'd advertised a special called session, I would be glad to have that move forward. Commissioner Houle.
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, I guess I'd just like to say, as colleagues point out, you know, what is theoretically low-hanging fruit, things that we could be doing or should have been doing, you know, this is probably a document to look at and see if and how those things could be incorporated and what kind of impact that would have on everything else that's happening. So I look forward to colleagues' ideas on that if there are any.
All right, we'll see the details of this in the agenda report, but again, we really saw the Gantt chart sort of as the centerpiece of this in our work session. 16 is a judiciary request for calendar year 2023 American Rescue Plan Act funds through the state of Georgia's administrative offices of the court. So these are state funds that they'll be prospectively accessing, and this is by title only, so we'll see an agenda report about this in the coming days. 17 is approval of the TSPLOST 2023 budget and adoption of the project tier funding schedule for the TSPLOST 2023 program. And for members of the public, upon passage of a SPLOST or TSPLOST program, the elected body has to sequence that program and say, here are approximately when the projects are going to emerge through the typical concept and then schematic process that we go through and then move to bid and award. So everybody saw this at our recent work session. Are there any questions or elements of input about this? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank staff for the presentation they gave the other night. I feel like that was very helpful in helping us to understand this and the process by which they came up with this. I think we should leave it off consent and encourage the public to take a look, because many members of the public are impacted by this and advocated for certain projects. So I just want to say that we should definitely leave it off consent.
Thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, Commissioner Denson.
Yeah, I think this is a question to the manager's office. So I know during the presentation we discussed, you know, the possibility of borrowing some funds to be able to possibly speed up some of the work such as pavement and stormwater, some of those more generic kind of buckets that were there. I guess I would like to see possibly, I don't know, like a recommendation or such, if that is in that kind of narrow focus of borrowing money, if that is a recommendation, and if so, like say maybe a bit of an alternative possibly that we can look at, and if it's something that staff thinks is an idea that we really shouldn't go for because of limited capacity and stuff, hearing that also, but maybe just so that could inform if anybody decides to do a CDO, trying to get that if it makes sense for us to do so. I'd love to get some of that feedback.
Thanks, Commissioner. And yeah, based on your questions, I've asked our finance director to write a memorandum for y'all as additional context, not only for the borrowing associated, potential borrowing with the TSPLOST and what a staff recommendation would do as you've requested, and Mr. Hamby made comments about, but also with respect to our bond rating and the Classic Center Arena request. So these are all sort of, have impacts on that. And so I want to catch both of those topics in one memorandum for y'all in the next couple of days.
Commissioner Hamby.
Sure. And if you could put in the memo as well, your crystal ball, maybe, projections about, because we know what interest rates are doing today as far as borrowing money, the traditional way. And I guess you're going to do a comparison between a bond and some monies that we can borrow conventional ways. But the thing that I do worry about, and we saw this with our paving, is if we don't take action now, by borrowing money, we can take action now and pay, 5% interest. I don't know what the interest rate's going to go to next week or this week, or whatever the interest rate is now versus the increase in cost for concrete and asphalt 5 or 6 years from now. So there's got to be some trend about how that's increased over the last 5 years, and maybe that can indicate what it would do over the next 5 years as well.
We'll
So you
ask-
see where I'm doing? I'm trying
Yeah.
to compare if it's cheaper to borrow the money now than it is to wait and pay more beyond interest rate 5 years from now. I don't know if I'm making any sense or not.
No, you
but,
are.
yeah.
And David Boyd, our finance director, does spend a lot of time, sort of reading the tea leaves. Of course, the only thing we know about the future, whatever we say will be wrong. But we can try and telegraph that and what his thoughts are on the interest rate environment, and I guess the recession and potential and what that could mean. There's a lot of factors that go into that, so we'll bake that into the memo.
Yeah. We know we're going to die, too. There is that. We do know that, so. Yeah.
You're correct. We do know that.
I think there's a saying about
Thank
death
you
and
for that.
taxes. Commissioner Thornton.
Yeah, I definitely want to sign off and chime off on that, of whatever we can do to get some of these projects up and going. I know that by the time and I definitely want to thank constituents in 9 and 2 that got involved in the TSPLOST process for the first time ever, and it is paying off. But I guess because we were kind of kicking it back and forth, and we ended up with a bucket with, I think how it was worded. Is there a possibility I can meet with you, County Manager Blaine, before this next meeting? So I'll make sure I'm clear of what I'm advocating for, to move the process forward, because, and I don't know. So if that's possible.
Yes, ma'am, of course.
Okay.
If I could also offer this, related, is taking a cue from the SPLOST 2020 process. We have bid out the project management services. So each program, we will continue to do that. As you know, the program administration came in-house and saved a full percentage point, which is roughly equivalent to $1 million in the program, from hiring our internal capital projects director, Robert Cheshire, something that you approved, that structure. And so I would expect that probably on the November cycle that there'll be a recommendation from a group that includes the mayor and a couple of commissioners and some citizens who have gone through an RFP process. It's been competitively bid. And then once you make that decision in the tiered, then we're off to the races.
All right, item 19 is right now by title only. This is the Reconnecting Communities grant application. This is an element of the bipartisan infrastructure plan. Very briefly, the Reconnecting Communities program is to ensure that some of that infrastructure vestige really from 50 or 80 years ago that did not serve communities is sort of brought up to standards where communities can be, as the program notes, connected. And so thematically, really, our North Avenue application that was successful was kind of in the same bent. It's to say, how do we get people safely from point A to point B when the roads or the other infrastructure or bridges that were initially put in place did not do that. And this is going to look at a planning process around Hawthorne Avenue. And so I don't know if Manager Williams, you wanted to highlight any other element of that.
I do briefly, and this will be an agenda item for you to consider. So the mayor, great summary of what the grant is, and it's meant to help vulnerable communities that were previously cut off from economic development by transportation infrastructure. And what staff is proposing is a planning grant for the Hawthorne Avenue corridor, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. So those grants are between $100,000 and $2 million. We think about $1 million here. But they're working on that cost estimate, and that can cover activities like public engagement, feasibility studies, data collection, and conceptual preliminary design, which, not unlike the Fowler Mill Road Bridge project, Belmont Road, the West Broad Roundabout, we hope to have a partnership with GDOT. So if that way that looks is just what you're proving now. We do the planning, we do the engineering, things like that. They come help with the construction cost. And obviously that corridor, that's going to be a big project. Why Hawthorne Avenue? It is one of the most historically dangerous segments of road in Athens-Clarke County based on crash data. We'll have all of that. Between January 2017 and December 2021, staff tells me that there were 415 crashes between Oglethorpe Avenue and West Broad. And so it's also important in terms of equity. We've got Brookside 1 and 2 there and some other historically minority neighborhoods. It's already in our Maycourt's TIP, our Transportation Improvement Plan, and thanks, Mayor, for your questions on that. It's an identified future GDOT project, so it makes sense that we position ourselves to try and have some impact there from a safety, equity, and procedural standpoint. Thank you, Mayor.
And just even thinking about, where we're probably going to see future density, it's in these in-town corridors. So, as we contemplate that, we want a safe roadway to introduce more folks to. Commissioner Link.
Yeah, I am thrilled to hear that Hawthorne Avenue hopefully will be getting the attention that it needs, because it certainly is a dangerous corridor to drive and to walk. It really divides the community, and there are so many valuable resources on it. The Y, the parks, there's shopping, plenty of jobs, and I hope that this grant comes through because it is a desperate need, and I think that corridor could really be a real boon to our whole community. It could really become, a real economic engine if it were properly addressed.
Commissioner Houle.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for that explanation. That all makes sense and sounds great. I noticed that you mentioned one of the reasons this qualifies is because it's part of the Maycourt's Transportation Improvement Plan. Could you just give a brief rundown of how areas can be added to or considered for the Maycourt's Transportation Improvement Plan?
Well, I'll give you the manager version, and I'm sure staff, our planning, transportation planning experts could do a much better job. But basically, there are regional transportation planning entities around the state. And ours is called Maycourts, and that stands for Madison, Athens-Clarke, Oconee Regional Transportation Study Committee, and it's made up of officials from all those counties. And it's really around the urbanized area, so it is all of Athens-Clarke County and small portions of some of the surrounding counties. And so folks are invited to come and have conversations about regional transportation infrastructure. And the state does require that there be a long-range transportation improvement plan, and you heard me use the acronym TIP, that stands for Transportation Improvement Plan, where, working with the state and our local officials, that we telegraph what our future needs are, and our future needs are considerable. And so GDOT uses this process to help understand what the respective priorities are for the communities across the state. And that tip changes over time. If you'll remember, y'all recently voted on releasing some property that had a $30 million project for a connection between West Broad and Mitchell Bridge Road. That had previously been in the tip, and then it got removed because priorities had changed over time. And so it's like most planning documents, it's an evolving live thing. But as Commissioner Link pointed out, there's many reasons why Hawthorne is something that GDOT has said, this is something that we need to do, and we want to be positioned well to respond to that.
Yeah, and just to think about another project that's very active right now, the Lexington Loop interchange had been initially projected for 2027, and it was really recognized that the amount of truck traffic that interchange carries, would be best suited by moving that forward to now. There was funding available in the GDOT pipeline, so we were able to do that. So another one. Commissioner Hamby.
Well, I'm going to comment on Hawthorne, but I also remember that Lexington Road started back in like 1998 for the planning and purposes. So it unfortunately takes a bit of time. I wish it didn't, not on our part. But the thing about Hawthorne, though, too, that is good, that I remember a few years ago from the discussion, Mayor, around economic development. Actually, we've got two hospitals that are on either side of Hawthorne, and certainly could become a healthcare corridor, so to speak. I remember us talking about that at one time and just trying to see what we can do to make something like that happen.
Commissioner Denson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a little bit, I'm definitely excited to hear about some potential funding coming through. I did have a little bit of questions, so kind of one of the things that had in the back of my head for a while and forget to bring up often is that, so back in 2019, I think it was, we voted on preliminary design plans for the Oglethorpe-Hawthorne intersection for 2011 TSPLOST. And I mean, looking up on the webpage, it's saying that basically everything was supposed to be moving forward, including construction this year. Can you give us just, and if you don't have that right now, just email, but this update on that, and if, I'm assuming that we're probably going to hold off on doing any of that until we find out if this grant's coming through, I'm assuming. Or would that even possibly change, if we get the grant, change those preliminary design plans?
Perhaps. We feel like, and if y'all remember, we even looked at a roundabout situation there, and it was encroaching on public right-of-way. And there may be some new and innovative ideas. I would say that because of the prioritization due to crash rates, that particular intersection was accelerated as far as planning and design. And it could be that we may be able to add some improvements, or it could be optimized like it is. But it will definitely be baked into the final plans. I believe that I've seen in the last few months the most recent iteration. So the work's ongoing, and we do plan to return to you for the allocation of funds at some point. This particular grant opportunity, I haven't been able to ask staff what that impact is on that timing. Okay. But we can follow up.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. And I guess just throwing out thinking back to that, I remember that the safety improvements and even the efficiency of the intersection were greatly improved with the roundabout. Just the size of the roundabout, like you said, was going to. So I think if this extra funding we can get GDOT to come through, while I think it needs that improvements need to happen as fast as possible, I think we also want to have the best improvements. So if it is possible that we could end up having that more of the dream plan instead, I think it makes sense for us to hold off. So
that's a good point. And just, roundabouts have proven fairly successful here. And when you have a corridor like that, like Chase Street, where the TAP grant's going to help us get to those roundabouts, it is worth considering before we make expensive investments on the changes. And safety is paramount, so that's really what's driving this.
All right. So finally, we have a single planning and zoning item. I'm going to go ahead and relocate, let Assistant Planning Director Bruce Lonnie present, and then have opportunity for public input on that item, and then commission discussion. So I think we didn't scare Assistant Director Lonnie too much at the work session recently and was willing to come back again to join us here behind the rail.
No. Yes. Come on.
Brad changed his password.
Do you want to borrow a laptop?
Yeah. Give me 1 second. I've got the presentation on a flash drive.
Where did you find the flash drive?
Ooh. For members of the viewing public, we
everybody
recently
took
had
that
to take technology training, and it was highly recommended that we not plug in any random flash drive that we encountered in a gutter or on a doorstep. And I'm hoping that that was not one of the origin stories for flash drive we're about to see presented here.
I saw Bruce pick that up off the sidewalk outside. See what I'm about to talk about. It's kind of scuffed
Ooh,
up.
6 terabytes.
You log into that with your
Public, we should make that training available. Public, so they'd be in on the jokes.
Just this?
Questions?
We can
The ever necessary dongle in the modern era. Here we are.
very prepared for these eventualities.
You do that, and I'll get this.
We
Somewhere.
were hoping to go back to DOS.
I bet there's some floppy disks somewhere in this building.
I got one downstairs.
Yeah, there we go.
She's got a whole bunch in her own.
I used to take, my digital camera used to take floppy disk pictures. First one we had here for,
Wow.
in the office.
We still have one in the planning department.
Is that why I
And
saw y'all
one
playing
photo.
Frogger down there?
Hmm?
Is that why I saw y'all playing Frogger down there?
Oregon Trail.
Here we go.
Yeah, I have dysentery.
All right.
Okay.
Lights, camera, action.
About that. Thank you for your patience. Okay. The one zoning item before you this evening is a planned development request involving 3 properties addressed above, 165 Mill Center Boulevard and 160 and 180 Mellwood Drive. These are on the west side of town. Here's a location map. You'll see Jennings Mill Parkway at the bottom third of your screen. Atlanta Highway is at the top of your screen. The area to the right, which is better seen in this aerial photograph, is Athens Church. And this also depicts the surrounding development condition that you have around these three parcels. You have a multifamily development to the south. You have a mix of a variety of commercial and light industrial uses to the northwest, and the aforementioned church, but in between you have some very low-density residential that's kind of a holdover from development patterns from 60, 70 years ago, frankly. So the request involves two parts. One is an amendment to the future land use map, asking to go from general business and traditional neighborhood future land use designations to a more uniform mixed-density residential classification for future land use. And then following that is a rezone request from two zoning categories that are on the ground now, RS8, single-family, relatively a higher density single-family, and CG, commercial general, to a uniform RM2, a mixed-density residential zone. Along with that is a design for 90 townhomes, totaling 270 bedrooms, and some quick details about the request. The unit size is roughly 2,000 square feet. Half of the units that are proposed are rear-loaded parking via an alley, half front on the alley. There's roughly 3.5 acres of green space proposed in the development. The development itself is a little over 11 acres total. There are 2 stormwater ponds to accommodate the development that are shown in the design. So going back to the future land use categories, this shows those a little more clearly. On the left, you have the current situation, and it's kind of hard to see because the outline is in red. But this parcel, no, you can't see my cursor. At the intersection of Mill Center and Jennings Mill at that northeast corner, that's commercial general, that's included. And then there are the 2 pieces just to the east of that that have Mellwood addresses. And the request is to unify that future land use category. The zoning request, similarly, takes 2 disparate zoning categories that are on the ground now and proposes a uniform RM2 with a plan development having the binding site plan and binding development scheme. And here's the site plan that was submitted. I would note that this is coming to you now after 3 processes through the Planning Commission. As part of those 3 attempts by the applicant to kind of work through comments and input, there were as many as 5 design proposals that ultimately landed at the one that you see before you tonight. Here are the architectural proposals that are associated with the request. These would be binding with the request, as typical with plan development. And so staff's recommendation in looking at this, I want to break it into 2 parts. The future land use part, this request represents an important moment from a future land use standpoint, land use policy standpoint. When you think of Jennings Mill Parkway 20 years ago, when we were working through the future land use map at that time, the thinking was that it was a parallel route to Atlanta Highway, that this was a route that was going to take truck traffic off of Atlanta Highway where we had passenger vehicles for the predominantly retail uses and adjacent residential. Over time, through a series of rezone requests and other developments that have occurred, we've had more and more residential on Jennings Mill Parkway. And we're at a tipping point, honestly. We're at a point where we're almost 50-50 between residential and non-residential land use that's currently on that corridor. And if you've driven the corridor, you can tell its design was more than just a 2-lane roadway. It was meant to carry a lot of traffic. So from staff's standpoint, we're looking at this as a moment to think critically about the future of the corridor. And we recommended a gentle approval for the change that mixed density residential, in its truest sense and the way it's worded, does allow for a variety of things to occur on Jennings Mill Parkway that are very compatible. The question then begs, does this rezone achieve those things? So that's the second part. The proposal in staff's review doesn't meet the character of the requested RM zone for the reasons noted above. The proposal as it's currently put together does not offer a variety of housing types. There's really not a walkable non-residential use component to this that would definitely be anticipated as part of the mixed density residential future land use. Half of the units face an autocentric alley system. The architecture is repetitious and somewhat nondescript. And the green space that is provided has largely been provided to handle stormwater. There is some amount, 3.5 acres worth of green space in this most recent iteration that is central to the site, but it's not nearly to the level that we would anticipate typically with that mixed density residential future land use. So from a staff standpoint, we recommend approval for the future land use, denial for the zoning. When the Planning Commission considered this, it was a mixed vote for approval of both requests. It was a 5-to-1 vote, I believe, for the future land use. It was a 4-to-2 vote on the zoning. And some of the same notes that were picked up on in the staff report were part of the discussion amongst the Planning Commission for the rezone request. But that concludes staff's presentation.
Thanks, Bruce. I appreciate it. All right, now it's opportunity for any public input on this item. Right, and rules are the same as described earlier, so you have 3 minutes, and then Clerk Spratlin will keep the light pertinent to the time left.
All right. Just whenever, okay. My name is Rebecca Hutchison. I'm a homeowner in the village of Jennings Mill and a resident of the Fairways at Jennings Mill, the apartment complex that ends at Mellwood Road. I'm in favor of this land use being used for residential purposes, single-family resident or multifamily development. Housing and rent prices are untenable in Athens. Most residents don't have jobs with salaries that can afford the average family home. There is no down payment assistance programs in Clarke County except for the Georgia Dream program. It has high fees, twice the percent origination in compared to other types of loans. There is no eligibility for USDA loans, which are 0% down payment loans in Clarke County, which is how my husband and I purchased our first home in Bethlehem in Barrow County several years ago. There's also a Chenoa down payment program that is available nationwide, but not well utilized or known here in Athens. Another point is that sellers in Athens don't want and will not take, for the most part, non-conventional loans, FHA, loans with Georgia Dream, USDA, which aren't, they like cash buyers, conventional loans with down payments. Cash buyers are preferred in how property management solutions were able to buy up 450 residences, increase rents by 70%, and reject Section 8 waivers, displacing many of our core residents who have been here for decades. As to any increased construction in this area or traffic concerns when this project is finished, which I hope it will be, I think any inconvenience caused for me personally as a resident and homeowner is worth and happily absorbed if it leads to more affordable housing in Athens. There's already a bus line on Atlanta Highway that could be expanded to accommodate our neighbors who find automotive ownership costly or unnecessary. We need as many affordable housing, single-family residence or multi-unit family dwellings as we can provide for the population that live here in Athens year-round and are essential for Athens to thrive as a community and economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Is there anyone else here to speak to this item? All right, we'll come for a commission discussion. I'll begin with Commissioner Houle, as this is in District 6.
Thank you, Mayor. So I've been following what's been happening here for about as long as I've been on this body. And I agree with the Planning Commission and staff recommendation in the change for future land use. My first question is, what does it look like to pursue an approval of the change in future land use without an approval of the rezone? Is there any reason to do one without the other, considering the rest of the corridor wouldn't have that?
You want me to do that? Bruce? As far as land use policy goes, that's certainly within y'all's purview to change the future land use and then not take action on the zoning request. I think procedurally, it might be more of a concern if it was a very small site and you were doing something that was noticeably dissimilar with the future land use, but it's a considerable amount of acreage. I don't think that would be problematic or inconsistent.
Yeah, I feel inclined to at least consider that, although I would like this body to consider that the likely change in future land use that we'd probably be looking at as part of a more helicopter view, overall view of what's happening in the county. The Jennings Mill Parkway, this road was not designed for residential, as was clearly highlighted in the presentation. And if we're going to approve future land use that is intentionally more like what's currently there, residential, I think we should be thinking about how residents would safely cross such a wide street that cars are likely to drive very quickly down. So, if this area really is built out the way we're kind of imagining it would be, I think it's important for us to maybe consider the implications of approving residential development in a place with a road that has vehicles traveling that quickly along lanes that wide. I did have a technical question about the sidewalk. That triangular lot, that as I understand it, maybe has kind of a vague title situation. The developer's required to build sidewalk along Jennings Mill Parkway along their lot, but would we just have a big gap along that? Okay.
Yeah. They do not have title to that, and it's not part of the development proposal.
Are you talking about that small, at the south end?
Yeah, the southeast corner basically is a separate lot that the developer has not purchased. And as I understand it, the reasons for that are probably related to some difficulty in figuring out who it could even be purchased from. I don't know, but that's just what's been relayed to me through the grapevine. So, thinking about the CDO that you put together, Commissioner Davenport, among a few conditions I'd want us to consider if we were to move forward with an approval, and I want to be clear, I'm currently very undecided on this, and I'm pretty dismayed that the applicant isn't here to answer questions, but, getting a sidewalk that actually goes all the way around, since there's not much of a reason to believe we'd get one otherwise, is definitely one of them. But, other concerns I have, at the end of the day, I don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I thought the Planning Commission brought up some good points around the design of this neighborhood not being optimal. Some units I think are going to be quite desirable and some not so much. But at the end of the day, they'll be better than no units in a community that's lacking housing for sure. But I don't want us to pretend that building cheaply guarantees us affordable prices. I think if this market is showing us anything, it's that things can sell for a lot more than they're worth when the rates of things are artificially driven up. So without some kind of a check on the affordability, I'm cautious about feeling like this is super related to affordable housing, although it certainly does get us more housing. I'd also want us to look at conditions around the connectivity to adjacent lots, the timing of the construction of amenities. So there's a lot of amenities that you see kind of wind through there. And I would hate for this to get approved and get half built and none of those amenities to be built. So, it's not uncommon for something like this to get approved and not get completed. We can't predict the future, as we've talked about earlier. We would like to have a crystal ball for the finance department to give us a specific indicator on what's going to happen, but we just don't know. So I'd be interested in guaranteeing that some kind of phased approach, where maybe after the first 50%, for example, is constructed, then those have to be completed before they can do the latter 50%, something like that. And I know also there are some design spec considerations raised up by the Planning Commission, types and size of trees, the width of the alleys, things like that, could maybe be tweaked without needing to send them entirely back to the drawing board. So with all that said, there's clearly a lot to work through with planning staff. I'm very grateful for their time already, and if the applicant, who's not here, is amenable to those conditions, then I may be interested in introducing a CDO with a number of conditions attached, but I'm also very open to colleagues' thoughts on this. Thanks.
Commissioner Davenport?
Oh, yeah, can you explain again? I'm sorry. The sidewalk on Jennings Mill, up with the lot, the little triangle, little piece, did you Did you say only build halfway? Oh, okay, there we go. Thank you so much.
So we'd get a side, they'd have to, without any conditions, build a sidewalk along half of Jenningsville Parkway. And there's an existing sidewalk that comes down the very narrow Mellwood Drive, but it just ends at Jennings Mill. So there would just be this grassy gap with a guardrail unless we added that as a condition.
Everybody understand that piece of it? All right. Commissioner Denson?
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, I watched the planning, and it definitely was some good discussion, and I appreciate I appreciate the comments made for the public comment here. I think they're definitely insightful for the situation we're in. Bruce, I do have a question. I believe when I was watching it, so I know that the developer presented a 3D fly-through video that they had, and I believe I heard Brad say on there that because they submitted the way they submitted that, that's actually would become part of the PD, and that if they looked at the trees and stuff, that could actually be counted in as part of the requirement as the PD.
Yeah, that is correct, and in the interest of time, I mean, I have it here, but that is absolutely part of the record, and
Right.
that's what Brad explained to the applicant.
Okay, so that, and I think that's, so actually, I mean, watching that, there's actually, I think, more trees and more specifics maybe that they, I don't even know if they intended that to be part of the PD, but it is, so that, which is great. And so I think that's an important aspect to think about too. And while I mean, if we can get them to include sidewalk along that stretch of Jenny Mills Parkway, I mean, that's great, because I think we always need to be just building up as much connectivity as possible. I do think right now it doesn't really lead anywhere, even if we do extend it over to there. But still, if we can get them to agree to, I think that'd be great. I think it is important to note that, not completely, but there is a good stretch of sidewalk going up Mill Center Boulevard toward Atlantic. If I'm thinking of any pedestrian use, I'm thinking it's going to be up Mill Center Boulevard for people to get to Atlanta Highway, to businesses that are along there, to hopefully future transit stop. And it looks like that's already developed there, although they don't have sidewalk towards the northern end of it. With that being said, yeah, this definitely, this development is not perfect. I do think there's a lot of good with it, though. One of the things I'm not crazy about with the Lexington development that we talked about earlier is that it does not allow attached housing, and attached housing is cheaper, just in general. It is cheaper to build, and therefore it ends up being cheaper to sell and cheaper to rent. And so, I mean, having this kind of attached housing here, I think is smart and is going to be able to keep rates down. And of course, it does add to the housing stock, which is desperately needed right now. So I'd be very happy to see some improvements on here. But at this time, I think I'd prefer this rather than not. So, yeah.
Commissioner Myers?
I just need some help, and also with our response from our comment from the public here. And I see the word affordable in here, a bunch of, in the application or in the reference to the comprehensive plan and such. But there's nothing in here that guarantees that these will be for sale versus rent. There's nothing in there. All right, and there can't be. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that also for our public who's here. And that's all I just wanted to ask right now.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, Bruce, can you return to the slide that had the concerns that the planning department, the department had? So my question is, if this were not a PD and were simply a rezone, how different, what about this proposed project would not be allowed under RM2?
There are a variety of design-specific things that are at odds with the code. They're outlined in the staff report, but they involve things like porch depth. They're very detailed design features that the PD allows them to flex some of those. If it was by right, they wouldn't be able to do that. The density is about the same if they went to a straight RM zone. Density is not an issue from there. And really, there's nothing else. I will say some of the roadway alignment, actually, no, that's not true. The fronting on the alleys is something we would have to look at differently with the code than with the PD. The PD does allow for that arrangement where you have half the units fronting on an alley. Whether or not this ultimately becomes a fee simple type of product, that's not what's proposed here. The code wouldn't allow for these if they were trying to assign lots, the lots couldn't be done this way. I think off the top of my head, those are the biggest inconsistencies.
Okay, and because this is a rezone from, I guess, CG, some portion of it is CG, would it qualify for our inclusionary housing program if they were to present this under that scheme?
The inclusionary housing standards as is written right now would not apply to the single family. So a large portion of this is RS8.
Okay, because of the combined zones on the.
Correct.
It would screw it up, okay.
But in an RM environment, if that was the underlying zoning, you'd get a 50% bump in density.
It is possible with the RM zoning in place, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have many problems with this. I mean, I feel like the issues that are brought up are primarily aesthetic. But I would like to see some kind of guarantee that there was some measure of like moderate income affordability in here. And because this is a PD, could we work that agreement in?
I think I have to be very careful there about, as I've said, the last time this topic come up, we need to work within the confines of our zoning ordinance. My concern would be, which now allows for increased density if the developer agrees to provide a certain number of affordable units. I clarified that the developer has not come forward and agreed to offer any affordable units with this development, nor have they requested increased density. So the issue you have is that this could be considered an illegal condition and enforcement, and whether someone who's opposed to it might seek to attack the zoning on that grounds, like a neighboring property owner who says, I don't want this near me, might attack it and say, this is not a valid rezoning because you have illegal conditions that don't relate to zoning. So I'd be very careful with that. And I know as you think about this, I said the same thing last time, I would caution members of the commission on approaching developers and demanding those type of conditions. I'd be very careful with doing that.
So because this includes that single-family lot within the combined property, we couldn't, the developer could not apply to be part of inclusionary zoning to get that extra density. Instead, they're doing the PD for the complete new zoning. I mean, this probably came up before we had inclusionary zoning as a thing.
It did. It did. This was in review before that had been adopted. But asking for the RM is essential to be able to participate. It's just they haven't given any indication that they intend to do that.
Commissioner Thornton.
And Commissioner Link has mentioned inclusionary zoning in her comments, but isn't inclusionary zoning just for the downtown area?
No, it's for all the commercial. And
Commercial
entities.
okay. Okay.
The thing that's only for downtown is the payment in lieu.
Okay.
So that piece of it
Okay.
is for downtown alone, except in very atypical circumstances.
Okay.
Commissioner Houle?
Question, a couple responses to colleagues. So that someone, when bringing forth a PD application, could have, when they were asking for the RM2 rezone, therefore included an inclusionary zoning based request attached to that rezone they're asking. It's not what the current zoning is, it's the rezone they're asking for that would apply for that kind of a request, right?
Correct. It could have been done contemporaneously.
And I'll just say that the applicant here was certainly aware that that existed and has clearly chosen not to include it. And so I am
It didn't exist yet whenever they first, that's what.
He just said it was.
Well, and let me be real clear on that. This is our third iteration at this, but in that third iteration, when they were bringing forward changes to their submittal to the Planning Commission, the inclusionary zoning provisions did exist.
Indeed. And this has been mentioned in multiple planning commission meetings as they've gone through the process, and, a number of those planning commissioners have also been involved in the developing of that inclusionary zoning policy, and I think it even raised that up in those meetings, so. So it's, it's clear that for whatever reasons, the developer here hasn't chosen to include that, and despite the use of the word affordable in many of their presentations, there's nothing in here that guarantees affordability the way we've discussed on this body, trying to do so through an inclusionary zoning policy. So I am therefore very cautious about us adopting a framing of this development that matches the framing they're giving us. I mean, they're selling us one kind of product to try to get it through this process, and then they're going to sell whatever kind of product they can fit the mold on the other end. And there's no reason to believe that they're not going to sell it for as much as they can. So, I mean, developers are going to tell us what we want to hear. I'm encouraged that there's a binding site plan here. I think there's a number of things that could be done that would make things look closer to what I imagine planning staff would have recommended if they had been consulted more on this, that in my mind would be reasonable, viable conditions. But I want us to think, and I'm certainly thinking about whether this seems worth it with the concept of affordability not part of the discussion, because that's just not, the only way this is relevant to affordability is that we have more units on the market in this town. And then as far as the trees and the fly-through, I mean, it's nice that they gave us that fly-through, but that doesn't specify species, diameter of the tree when it's planted, where and how many there are, et cetera. They can go through, as Brad said he would, and count what they see on the fly-through, but, I think if we really want to have a development that will look anything close to what that fly-through indicates it would, we'd do well to specify some things, and there's some things we could around the size of the trees at planting, et cetera. So anyway, that's all I got for tonight.
Before I move to Commissioner Davenport, I guess I just want to note that a variant of the route would be to approve the future land use and direct the developer back to the Planning Commission for some specific updates, if there are some component pieces, if there are architectural details that this body wants to see. So another route is that. And at that point, they'd have the underlying future land use and then be directed to go back for another swing at bat. Commissioner Davenport?
I just want a copy of the fly-through. Can I get one? Get a copy?
Yeah, we can share it with all of you.
And it's on the YouTube. I ended up, because we were in Tuscaloosa, I had to watch this after, so you can kind of watch it on the YouTube channel too.
I just hate you.
Commissioner Edwards?
Thanks. This project is interesting to me because I think it's indicative of many of the housing projects we've seen over the past 5 years where developers are putting together parcels on the outskirts of town and basically cutting down the forest and putting down as much density as they possibly can. And it's not exactly what I like to see, especially being so away from the bus line and sort of the urban core with all the services in this community. I do view it as auto-centric. I think the balance is, though, that we do have a housing shortage. We are getting more housing with this development. But I really think it's indicative, though, of what we're trying to grapple with our ordinances right now. It's very difficult to add density in town, within the loop. We don't allow duplexes, quadruplexes by right. We're not allowing apartments like the Stiles apartment in 5 Points, 3 stories attached. We're seeing more and more of these where developers are finding large parcels, 10 acres, and cutting down the forest and loading them up. So I really hope we can try to navigate how we can direct more density into the urban core where we already have the services and where we already have brownfields that can be redeveloped, surface parking lots, large surface parking lots that can be redeveloped, instead of cutting down the forest and sending more people on car trips into downtown.
One note I would make, Commissioner, is that particularly for the CG component of this, the canopy requirements would be probably much lower than what you have here overall. Obviously, it's a split zone parcel currently with some RS8 and some CG. So there's I think this is a complex project, just given the current zoning and then the requested zoning. So, Commissioner Houle.
Yeah, and, you know, I mean, a lot of District 6 is being proposed to be mowed down for this sort of stuff, so I agree with my colleagues' remarks about, you know, how we need to approach things differently in town to drive more density where it makes more sense. But, you know, as far as something going here, and something probably will, one thing this does have going for it is that they're coming in at a higher conserved canopy than is required and planting more trees than is required. So as far as the mowing goes, it's less bad than it could be in that respect.
Commissioner Myers.
I do want to point out that this is not way out in the green zone for clarification purposes. It's from the Jennings Mill to Atlanta Highway where there is a bus route, and we are planning on a transit center, which is a transfer session center, which is just across the street. It's 0.3 miles from Jennings Mill Road out to Atlanta Highway. So we're not really talking about in the middle of nowhere. There's a lot of growth and development in that area. And that is where we're also just across the street in Atlanta Highway looking at the, the whole Georgia, the Square Mall redevelopment area. So this is an area where I think the future land use is going to change an awful lot if we're going to be able to fit more density and more people into homes in Athens.
All right, clearly some thought ahead of every member of this body here. Bruce, thanks for the presentation very much.
Well, if I could, he'd probably kill me for telling y'all, but the reason Brad's not here, he's got married.
Oh.
So congratulate Brad Griffin when you see him.
I thought it was Bruce that got married. Somebody told me Bruce got married. I was,
Glad you didn't spread that rumor.
She said it doesn't count as a honeymoon. This is for her
Have a great
birthday.
evening, everyone.
Thanks, good night.
Yeah.
I'll move to adjourn.
Yeah.
Motion to
Doing
adjourn.
the best I can to kind of.
Mayor? Mayor?
Without objection.
If you need something by the end of the week, send it to me.
Hey.
Okay.
I apologize, may I have a motion to adjourn?
And you just want to go in there.
Motion from Commissioner Denson, second from Commissioner Lee. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Any
Want
opposed?
to get done, because there's certain folks that are good at certain.